Hi, and welcome to a very special Green Sofa Talk. Joining me today is Aman Sharma. He's a climate justice activist, a wildlife photographer. He's from India, and he's also the co-founder of the Re-Earth Initiative. Thank you so much, Aman Sharma, for joining me. Hello, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you so much. So Aman, we are here today to talk to you about some of your expectations for COP26, but before we do that, I wanted to ask you, where in the world are you right now?
I'm in Philadelphia.
What are you doing in Philadelphia?
I am here for college. I go to the University of Pennsylvania as a freshman.
Okay, congratulations on starting university. I know that's a big step.
Thank you.
How are you enjoying it?
It's been great. Till now, I've had a lot of fun at college. Yeah, it's a lot of studies, but I'm looking forward to studying more about the things that I'm interested in.
That's fantastic. You said that you have a class after this. What class is it that you're going to go to?
I have to go for a music class.
I really need to know, what kind of music class?
It's based on the history of opera.
Aman, I used to be an opera singer, so I'm really excited that you're taking a class about the history of opera. Oh, that's fantastic. All right, let's get back to the energy transition and climate change. I know that you are from India, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about your perspective, what's going on in India and what's going on where you are right now in Philadelphia. But if you can think back, what got you interested in being an environmental activist?
I think my parents made a conscientious effort and decision to take me to nature parks and sanctuaries throughout my childhood. So instead of visiting countries abroad, a lot of my holidays and vacations would be spent exploring the natural heritage of my own country. And I think that is something that triggered this fascination for wildlife and nature in me. Um, and that is where when I saw the kind of things that were happening around me, when I saw the way that the environment was being treated and the threats that the environment faced today, be it biodiversity loss or climate change, I could not just stand by and watch, but I had to do something or anything that I could in whatever capacity that I could to make sure that I was making a difference in my own way.
You talk about biodiversity, and I know that you are also a wildlife photographer. I checked out your Instagram. I saw some gorgeous pictures of birds that you took. Could you maybe talk about those for a second?
So very early on, one of my fascinations with wildlife also turned into my fascination with photography, where everything that I saw out in the wild, I wanted to document. Um, and it was one of the best ways for me to raise awareness because most people in Delhi did not even know that Delhi has more than 500 species of birds, or Delhi is the second most bird populous city in the world. So when I would go out there, when I would see these birds, I would take these pictures. And when I would post these pictures online, people would be shocked. People had no idea that you had all these colorful birds right in the middle of an urban city like Delhi, right outside their doorsteps, right outside their balconies. Um, so photography for me was a way of connecting people and putting into perspective the natural world that existed in urban spaces for them. It was this way of showing them what lied outside their own backyards. Um, and connecting them to the wild, even if they're sitting at home and just seeing an image. They should feel a connection with that image. They should feel a connection with the urban wildlife of the neighborhood that they live in. And that was my aim with all of the photography that I've done.
And you talk about connecting people to where they live through the medium of photography. And how does photography connect for you to environmental activism?
I think photography is a way of showing the truth. Um, Photography cannot be manipulated. Photography is something that shows facts. While most of the photography that I do shows the glorious side of nature, it shows beautiful, pristine habitats and birds and animals. There's another side of photography, which shows the kind of destruction and the impact that we have caused on nature today. The kind of habitats that are being ruined, the ways that wildlife is suffering and honestly diminishing. Each trip that I take into the wild, I'm seeing less and less birds now. I'm seeing less and less wildlife now. I'm seeing less and less of a habitat now. which used to be ecologically intact, um, and sensitive. So I think photography is a way of showing the change between a place. Photography shows you that the environment is not constant anymore because of the changes that are being brought in by humans. And photography really shows you the state of the environment today, with no filters, um, and with nothing to hide.
And when we look at the state of the environment and what has changed, what is it that you hope that your photography and your activism can communicate, say, to the world leaders who are assembled at COP26?
I think I would just like to tell the world leaders that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is also a social rights issue. It is a political issue. It is a race issue. Climate change is basically a social justice issue. And a lot of my activism and photography is based around that. I want to make sure through my photography that we're including wildlife, um, and nature in the conversation of the fight against climate change. Through my activism, I want to make sure that we're including indigenous communities, marginalized communities, people of color, people who come from developing nations like me, people from the global south, in all of these conversations that we have. Um, so both of those are just a way for me to make sure that the confluence and the convergence of all sections of society, as well as wildlife, happen, and we take into account the benefits and the interests and ideas of all stakeholders that we have. Because an issue like climate change, which is so vast and so big, can honestly never truly be countered if we do not take into account all stakeholders in society.
I think that's absolutely correct. I really do. And thank you for saying it. When it comes to COP26, which is going on right now, by the time this airs, there will just be a few more days of the conference. Do you have expectations? Do you have concerns that you want to share with the people who are at COP?
Since I got into activism, I've seen a lot of summits take place, COP take place. Um, and while I've had a lot of expectations, I've never seen those expectations ever be met, or those promises that are made at these summits ever be delivered. So my expectation from COP would be, yes, that the leaders come out, say something, do something, which is concrete, which is actionable, and which is immediate. But is that something that is very likely? To be honest, I don't think it's very likely when it comes to that translating into actions and policy work. It's more likely when it comes to it being said as an empty promise or as words, like they always are. But what I do have is hope. Something that I feel like a lot of activists cannot lose in the climate movement is hope. And we always cling on to the hope that the next summit things are going to be better. This summit things are going to be better. Leaders are actually going to take notice of what's happening around, actually do something, actually say something, actually make those equitable policies that don't just focus on climate action, but also focus on climate justice, that don't just look at the planet, but also look at people. Um, so my hope is that these changes are made, these decisions are taken, these huge declarations are done, that really put climate into the center focus of society today. And my fear is that that would be something that just happens on paper, but never translates into the ground reality.
You said something about words that then are actionable. Can you give us an example of specific actions that you would love to see happen? And you can talk about it from a perspective in Philadelphia, where you are now. You can talk about it where you're from. Yeah, let me know what you think.
Some of the things that I feel like need to be done today is we need to restore the habitats, as well as do efforestation and reforestation in a lot of the countries where the forest cover is not enough. In most countries today, I would say the forest cover is not as much as it should be. In India itself, forest cover is not 33%, which is what is recommended. So that is something that we really need to work on today. The second thing that we need to work on is making equitable policies that look at not just planet, but also uplifting the people. When we talk about fighting climate change, we also need to talk about fighting the impacts of climate change. And those impacts of climate change are felt by the people. So we need to make sure that whatever policies we take help empower and uplift those people, help reduce the burden of the impacts of climate change on those people. And in a lot of cases, these people are um, say people of color who are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, or indigenous communities, or as I said, communities from the global south. These are the communities that are being impacted today, but because they may not have access to the same resources, platforms, or opportunities that a lot of other people do, their concerns aren't being heard, their voices aren't being um, able to reach mainstream media today or reach the core of society. And those are the voices that we need to truly give a platform to. Those are the voices that we need to make sure are heard and get a say at the decision making table. And another thing I would really like to see would be a shift from fossil fuels. Um, as an activist, but also as a person who comes from a country like India, I understand that change cannot happen overnight. And I also understand that it's not practical to say, let's leave all industries that are polluting the planet at this moment and shift to green industries without being able to give an actual just and fair alternative transition of jobs and livelihood to the people who are engaged in these industries, right? But I also understand that it is possible to shift from fossil fuels, to shift from the industries and corporations that are killing our planet, to much safer, cleaner, greener alternatives if we do it, if world leaders want to do it, if people want to do it. The science is with us, the people are with us. I think all we need is the political, social, and economic will to change these systems and institutions that have existed for so long, to dismantle them into systems that are more aware of the world today, that are more suited and adapted to climate as it is today.
Maybe you can help me understand why we need to listen so much to the younger generation, to people of your age and younger when it comes to these issues.
I think people of my age and younger have a gaze not just on the current and the present, but also on the future. Um, we have an idea of what it's going to be like to live in a world um, that is not ideal for habitation, to live in a world where forests don't exist anymore, maybe to live in a world where rivers run plastic, where the air is unbreathable, which, to be honest, in a lot of times of the year in Delhi, the air does become unbreathable. The air does become really, really polluted already. And it's only going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. Um, so when we look at the generation of young people today, we're not just thinking about today, but we're also thinking about our lives in the future. We're also thinking about the lives of future generations. Um, and we're going to have to live with the impacts of climate change. The older generation perhaps will not be able to see how climate change truly pans out in the next 30 years or so. But my generation will be living with the impacts of climate change every day. Um, and I think that is something that scares us. That is something that moves us to action. We're fighting here to reclaim our future as well as our present.
It scares me too. I have to be really honest. It really scares me too. If you could speak to your fellow activists, I wonder, is there anything that you would want them to do? More, different, else?
I think what I would want a lot of my future activists to do is to try and fall in love with nature as well. Because I feel like a lot of people who advocate for climate today do an excellent job at activism and do an excellent job at communicating to people the science. But something that gets left out a lot of times is the plight of the environment today, the plight of wildlife, the intersections between biodiversity loss and climate change. I think that is something that a lot of times climate activists do not focus on or give ample attention to. Um, and I feel like sometimes that may be because they themselves haven't had the best chance to go out and experience nature and experience the wild, to be introduced to wildlife in their own neighborhoods. So I would love for all climate activists to maybe go on a bird watching trip or on a wildlife trip once, and also feel more connected to nature and include that in some of the conversations that I have, because I know a lot of them have a lot of vital mics and platforms that we're using today that could really help the state of urban biodiversity in their own cities.
I have to say, I have really enjoyed looking at the introduction that you've given to your neighborhood in the last few days. And I saw a fantastic video that you did on your terrace with a lot of plants right after the rains. And that was fantastic to look at the trees and the plants that aren't where, we don't have those where I live or where I'm from. Have you found a bird watching community there in Philadelphia?
Not in Philadelphia yet, because it's just been few weeks since I moved here, when college has started. So with midterms, there was a lot going on. But I had co-founded a bird watching community back in India, which is called the Cuckoo About Nature community. It is now one of the biggest child-led bird watching communities in India for children, which is led by children themselves. And it was all based on the unique idea that children lead bird walks for other children. So children are the ones taking children out into wild spaces, into urban neighborhoods, and introducing them to wildlife species that exist in their own backyards, and helping make sure that that connection with nature starts young, especially when you see children taking the initiative, taking the lead on this. I think it's something that's inspiring, that motivates other children to join us, and that's something that's very, very amazing to see and experience.
I think that's really amazing. I live in the middle of the city and I really enjoy every time we get a chance to get out and look at the outskirts of Berlin. There's a lot of sand. My kid loves to dig. So there's like this, we see lots of creatures in the sand that we wouldn't otherwise see. And it is fascinating for him to really get a chance to investigate the nature that sort of is around him that he otherwise wouldn't see. He makes me think, and obviously you make me think of what else young people can do. You started this incredible child-led bird watching association for children. What else can young people do to sort of, leverage points that they might have that can help mitigate climate change and make a difference when it comes to climate action?
I think young people have so many issues that they can choose to tackle today. And not all of them even have to be within the environmental space for them to be making an impact when it comes to, say, climate. Um, when you fight for social justice in general, you're making sure that the people who would be impacted the most by climate change, the people who are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, are getting an equal say in society, are getting a better seat at the decision-making table. And when you do that, you make sure that the impact of climate change on them is reduced, that they are more secure and safe when it comes to the changing climate and how it would be just creating differences and changes around them. Um, so honestly, start a bird watching community, start a wildlife conservation organization, conduct climate strikes in your city, wherever you're from, start a recycling initiative, start a group that goes to the beach and picks up the litter and plastic every weekend. It's just about making a small change, or making a change that fits in with what it is that you want to tackle. There are so many problems and we possibly can't tackle them all. So usually we need to try and figure out what is the easiest for us to do, or what is the most comfortable for us to take up given the kind of city that we live in or the region that we inhabit, or what is most closest to our heart. For me, it was always wildlife, which is why I started a bird watching community. For someone else, it could be making sure that the plastic doesn't get into our oceans. It could be making sure that the air isn't polluted. It could be making sure that indigenous communities, especially if they're from the community, get their say when it comes to having a platform and voicing their concerns.
I think those are fabulous ideas, and you make me excited to go out and start an initiative in my neighborhood. Aman Sharma, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me on and having this important conversation. It's been a pleasure chatting with you too. And hopefully we'll keep having more of these conversations that truly talk about climate in the spotlight, and feature young people who are trying to make a difference in their own community.
I hope so too. Thanks. Ciao.
Thank you.